Next up, we'll turn to a fireside chat between two figures in Europe who are driving the conversation about European competitiveness. They really need no introduction. We've got European Commission Executive Vice President Teresa Ribera and former Italian Prime Minister Enrico Letta. Please welcome my colleague Laura Greenhouse and Teresa Ribera to the stage, and we'll be joined by Mr. Letta online. Laura, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Greenhouse, Politico's editorial director for European policy. And what a time to be tackling the topic of Europe's competitiveness with two fantastic speakers. As we heard through the conversations yesterday evening and this morning, there is a really strong desire amongst those that we've spoken to for the European Pulse Survey to build a Europe that is stronger and more independent, fueled in part by an understanding that the relationship with the United States has fundamentally changed. And of course, the competitiveness of Europe is being tested right now with the energy crisis. Commissioner Ribera, we hear a lot that, part of the solution to Europe's competitiveness is the single market, and in particular, a real capital markets union, energy union. I guess my opening question for this discussion to you is, are those plans, are they seriously going to happen?
No, that's a very nice question, but look, I think that the decades that have gone since the very beginning, the very starting point of the European project, prove that we are able to overcome difficulties and to keep on deepening in our integration. And I think that now we are experiencing one of those moments where we realize that it is either further integration or falling apart. And falling apart is not an answer for the challenges of today. So yes, I think this is absolutely needed. And of course, it may be difficult, challenging to identify how we can overcome the barriers that still exist in many critical sectors that are very close to our heart at the member states level. But this is very important, and I think that Enrico was very right when he said in one Europe deserves one market. And we have lots of strengths. We have overcome lots of very difficult challenges, and it is time to keep on going. We have done a lot in a very short period of time, how we can address a simplified model for small companies willing to count on a 28th regime, something that counts in all member states with the same rules, how we can simplify and avoid overlappings, how we can get into a much more connected Europe, how we can think of a single telecom market instead of 27 national telecom markets, how we can speed up if the complementarities of our energy systems, how we can build a broader concept of security that also allow us to step up in subjects that we did not expect to be facing in the time to be, as how we can create a common approach when thinking about security and defense. So yes, I think that we will keep on going all along these lines, including what about a single capital union, how we can improve the capacity to provide different financial solutions at an affordable cost for those willing to thrive, willing to grow in Europe.
So that's a very optimistic message, and I think, you mentioned you see the latest crisis is kind of bringing countries together. I want to take this opportunity to bring you in, Mr. Letta. Obviously, it's 2 years on from your famous report, and I wondered what's your main message for European leaders at this moment?
First of all, good morning from Washington, D.C. I'm very sorry not being in Barcelona today, but I'm very happy to try to contribute. I think Teresa perfectly set up the scene of the topic. I saw a big and important acceleration in the last 2 months. Since the European Council meeting, the retreat that the leaders had in Aldenbiesen, February the 12th, until next week European Council that is supposed to take place in Brussels, 2 months of acceleration on this, on how to land on the One Europe, One Market project, as Teresa just rightly said. I have to say that I see today, if I have to be very, I would say, short in focusing the main problem. The main problem today is the mismatch between urgencies and structural problems. We are talking about structural problems because the 3 main issues that you, Laura, and Teresa mentioned are issues, so the lack of an energy union, the lack of capital markets union, and the lack of interconnectivity union is something that is lasting from 35 years, because we didn't create the single market at the beginning on these 3 subjects. And then we postponed always because of one topic or one crisis until now. But it is clear that to get these results, we need structural changes, and structural changes are deep, profound, complicated, and they give results not the week after.
And
at the same time, today we have urgencies because of the war. So the raise of the cost of energy, and so we need immediate answers. This is the big mismatch, and it's not easy for the Commission and the European institutions to set up the structural new single market with this One Europe, One Market, at the same time give answer to the urgencies that are today the main problem. I see this as the main political issue today.
Thank you, and I guess, yeah, you mentioned the urgencies, and I guess it's not irrelevant that the last European Council actually postponed a discussion on competitiveness in the single market because of the new crises, so that balance is very live. Commissioner, I mean, turning back to you, and I guess looking at the kind of short-term energy crisis, one of the ideas that the EU's been talking about is relaxing state aid rules in order to give countries more room to support. And I wondered how much room you see for this, and whether you support this as a really strong solution to the current crisis.
Well, I think that when speaking about state aid, using public money, we need to take into consideration that whatever response we provide should at least fulfill a couple of criteria. First of them, we should be addressing the root cases. So, of course, there are aspects that deal with solidarity that are beyond state aid rules, because it is just social policies, and that's something that is very much in the political willingness of European governments. Europe has been crafted, shaped as a continent that takes care in a balanced manner of a market-based economy with high social standards, social considerations and environmental grounds. And that's part of our DNA when thinking in national politics. State aid is trying to cover market failures, so to accelerate, for instance, the deep decarbonization of our industry, the deep transformation of our energy system, combining public money to ensure adequate leverage of private money. This is not going to be handled just by public budget. We need to ensure that we crowd in private investors in the right direction, and that's a combination of smart use of public money with adequate regulation. And the third thing I could say is that what we are trying to fix is this structural change around what it was defined at the very beginning of this mandate, the competitiveness compass, the clean industrial deal, the clean industrial state aid framework, so that everybody knew what could be used by other member states to ensure transparency and not breaking the level playing field in the internal market. We don't want distortions in this single market that has been so important and still needs to be deepening. But at the very same time, yes, it is true that there is this short-term demand to react. How we can facilitate the adequate support for people to to survive this shock in the very short term. And this is where we are trying to work to identify the very focused short-term emergency measures that, to the extent possible, should be trying to identify responses that do not deviate for the long-term structural transformation that we are entailing, because we don't want to waste public money. We want to ensure that this facilitation goes along the lines of the deep transformation.
So you believe that the relaxation is not incompatible with the long-term transformation? That's
I think that what you may call relaxation is what I would call the need to ensure to the Europeans and to the European business community that we care about our performance. And of course, there are more limits in terms of fiscal space. We are not placed in a moment where we can spend whatever. But we are also stronger. We have learned from the previous crisis, and it's been a period full of crises. COVID crisis, Ukrainian invasion, and we have been able to identify what type of measures are more effective, perform better, and provide the right incentives to ensure that we are increasingly resilient without undermining this direction of travel that we want to facilitate and support.
You also mentioned the clean transition, and I mean, we saw overwhelming support within the Pulse survey for shifting to renewable energy. I wanted to ask you, I mean, does speeding up the green transition essentially mean that the EU has to accept a degree of dependence on China?
Well, I think that there are different ideas that you inspire. First, I think that it is good to understand that there are many countries in the world with similar intentions to provide comfort and prosperity to their people, to boost competitiveness in their industrial schemes, that understand that science, research, effectiveness, efficient use of resources make sense. And that was the case of China. And I think that that's, broadly speaking, a good thing. The bad thing is that it should not mean that are companies in Europe that comply with high standards in environmental rules, in social rules, to consider that there is a non-level playing field when others may try to sell their products in our internal market. So we need to ensure that we can reconcile the internal and external dimension of this very open market economy that we have in Europe. At the very same time, we have lots of strengths, including from the industrial perspective, from the skills and the training and educated population that can provide additional results, that can thrive in innovation and giving new results, that can count on the existing infrastructure to boost our economy. So I do not accept this message that sometimes come from the United States or from China, like telling you Europeans are old-fashioned. It's not true. We have the capacities, we have the strengths, we perform well, and we can perform much better. And this is where remaining united is important. So I think that, yes, we need to learn that we cannot rely on sensitive dependencies. We cannot think in strategic terms without paying attention to the risk of increasing our vulnerabilities, fragilities, or high reliance. The concept of being resilient, being autonomous, rebalancing global and local, facilitating a much more diversified portfolio, trying to build our trade relations, our external relations, the soft power, that is also part of power, to build different partnerships is very important. And we know how to do it. So we need to update the way we do it. But I would not say that we need to accept high dependence from countries that produce fossil fuels, or alternatively, high dependence of countries that produce clean tech. We can produce clean tech, we can find solutions, and we can rebalance the relation with many other players around the world.
Thank you, very clear. I mean, moving on to technology and digital, because it would be very remiss to have a conversation about the competitiveness of Europe without tackling those topics. Mr. Letta, I wanted to bring you back in briefly because you mentioned the 28th regime, which was obviously a model that's been launched by the EU designed to meet the demands of startups. There's been plenty of criticism so far of the proposals that they won't necessarily meet the needs of the startup world and, for example, tech startups. What are your thoughts?
The proposal from the Commission, the EU INC, I think, goes in the right direction. It has two problems, but the two problems are related to the treaties. And the two problems, of course, are the fiscal issue and the labor issues. There are limits related to the treaties, so the Commission has to work considering these limits. But it is the beginning of a discussion, and in my view, what is very important is that the Commission presented a proposal that is not limited for tech startups. It can be broader in terms of application. So now it's time for Member States, the Council and the Parliament to take the topic and to go forward. You know, the main issue is also for what Teresa just said, the word scale. Scale is the main mission for Europe. We need to integrate the markets to scale up. We need to have new rules like EU INC to scale up. We need a strong, united capital market in Europe to scale up. We are too small because of the fragmentation. What I would like to say is that fragmenting in 27 national sovereignties means sending gifts to the Americans and the Chinese and the rest of the world. If we want to be sovereign, we have to be sovereign at European level. Today, this is the role, and EU INC goes in that direction. It is the beginning, and we have to work, and the entire mission is to scale up, because it is what we didn't do in the last 30 years.
Commissioner, you visited Washington and Silicon Valley recently. What were your takeaways from that trip as it pertains to Europe's place in technology future?
Well, I had a very interesting mission to Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and Washington and New York. And I think that what it is important is to understand that dealing with digital and AI, that is so much in the scope today because of the very relevant systemic role in the whole economy and the way we understand in our houses the information we get and we make up our minds. So it's also relevant not only in terms of jobs or in terms of performance at the economic level, it's also important in the way we frame our understanding of the world. I think that one of the main aspects of this mission was to try to show to what extent many of the expectations of an average European citizen matches the expectations of an American average citizen in terms of how we can track the information, how we can comply with an ethical approach of this management, how we need to prepare ourselves to what it is coming, how we need to preserve this level playing field and to ensure that new developers can challenge the traditional incumbents, and how this means mutual respect in terms of obligations and enforcement of the law, but also an opportunity to have an open, forward-looking, strategic understanding on the huge challenges that all these new disruptions may mean in our world if we want to stay living in a democratic context with opportunities for all.
Yeah. You mentioned two things there, the level playing field and enforcement of the law. I mean, I guess an obvious question is, where are you at on enforcing the Digital Markets Act? Can you point to any success stories or the flip side of that, why is it taking so long to bring some of these decisions through?
Well, I think that it is a story of success. The DMA, Digital Markets Act, started to be enforced 2 years ago, and we have completed the first cycle. We will be opening this review process to understand what it has worked and what it has not worked. It has allowed people to ensure interoperability. I think that
Oh, sorry, we've lost a mic here.
This must be something related
Great.
to the enforcement of the DMA. Now, I think that there are lots of things that have happened. The two main goals of this ensuring the level playing field in the digital markets is ensure the interoperability so that people can choose. And this has been largely improved in the recent years, in our phones, in our services, in the access to the platforms, and the access to the data. So to ensure that it is not because there have been companies that have been very successful up to now and count on this access to the data, there can be no new players that can train and develop new proposals, new services in the time to come. So I think that it has worked, it has been working, it still works. It is a complex reality. We have tried to combine something that is provided in the rules, so specifications, how you should identify what are the obligations to do or not to do when you have been defined as a gatekeeper because of the importance, your share in a given market. And this ensures that there is this learning process, which is very important. Of course, it cannot be a non-end story. We need to ensure that through the specifications, through the regulatory dialogue, we achieve the goals of the full performance of these obligations. So yes, there have been also infringement procedures that have been open. We respect the law. We consider that being reliable and playing according to the rule of law is a very relevant asset, and we Europeans want to stick to these assets. So the procedures take time because we want to take decisions based on evidence and after having allowed anyone under this procedure of infringement to defend their case. But yes, we have fulfilled some of these infringement procedures, and still there are quite a lot that are
And
open.
just as a final question, you mentioned the regulatory dialogue. Are you talking with your US counterparts about, for example, the Google decision and other sort of big cases coming through?
I would say that there has traditionally been a very fluent and important dialogue between the Department of Justice in charge of antitrust and the Department of Trade, that also has competence in antitrust aspects, and the DG Competition. And it has been very fluent. And in fact, the whole development and adoption of the DMA, the Digital Markets Act, was taking quite a lot of time and developed in full, I don't know if participation, but at least very fluent dialogue with the US administration in Trump 1 period. In this little bit more than 1 year since Trump turned back to the White House, we have kept this very important dialogue. And I think that this is key. I mean, the ideal thing, even if the systems are different, and in their case it is mainly the courts that state whatever, and in our case it is the DG Competition that states and enforces the law, it has been quite fluent and quite consistent. And for the time being, what we see is that there have been 2 very recent statements coming from courts in the United States that provide a kind of sense of to what extent, as I said, the type of concerns that average Americans may have when thinking about their children, the education, the information, the traceability, the reliability, may be quite similar to the type of concerns that average European citizens may have. I still have a great relationship with the acting boss of the antitrust authority in the Department of Justice, and I think that this is key, to keep this dialogue open. This doesn't mean someone telling to the other what to do. Of course not. Okay. We are sovereign in taking our decisions. But this means that it is important to keep the dialogue open.
Thank you, and so much more to discuss, but we're going to have to leave it there for today. Thank you so much, Enrico, for joining online and waking up so early in America. And thank you, Commissioner, for your thoughts.
Thank you.
We're going to hand over to my colleague, Jamil Andolini, for the next session.